Chapter 3. Life as an Advanced Care Paramedic. In January 2011, I packed my little Toyota Corolla to the roof with my life possessions and set off on a 2,000-kilometre drive to far north Queensland. I said goodbye to my mum and dad and little dog, and with my significant other, Eric, by my side, embarked on my journey to the tropics. I had an MP3 full of good music and a big grin on my face. It was during this trip I realised just how expansive and diverse Queensland is. From barren red dirt to cane crops, eucalyptus forests to farming lands, dense rainforest to long stretches of beach. The further north we travelled, the bigger the mountains became, and after 3 long days on the road, we reached our destination of Cairns. I spent 2 days with my love exploring the incredible tablelands and rainforests. But I felt pain and sadness, for the love of my life was soon to be returning home, to leave me to my new environment. This would be the longest period I had ever spent away from my best friend, my love, my strength. With tears in my eyes, I said goodbye to Eric at the airport, took some deep breaths, wiped my eyes, and walked away. I had a whole new adventure ahead of me. I had lifelines to forge, friends to make, and 1 week to learn all I needed to about this unknown new region. During my week of inductions, I met and re-met the 6 other university graduates that had also been assigned to North Queensland posts. We were inducted into the radio system and other new protocols, and challenged with various scenarios to test our skills. We were taught about the deadly jellyfish that inhabited the warmer northern waters, and were trained in using box jellyfish antivenom and other life-saving drugs. We were warned of the cyclone season and the lack of radio reception in some areas. There was also talk of the possibility of attending jobs as a single officer, but were assured we would be well supervised during our first 2 weeks. We filled up on information and set off to our new homes. First week on the job, and I was faced with a cyclone. My first cyclone, and a week I would never forget. On my first day of work, I had no call-outs at all, but on my second day, I worked 15 hours straight, and that was just the start of it, as Cyclone Yasi was about to hit far north Queensland. Paramedic resources were stretched to the limit. I spent 10 hours transporting evacuated patients from Cairns Hospital and surrounding areas. I finished work at midday, 5 hours overtime, and was required for work again at 7:30 the next morning. It was the day before the Category 5 cyclone was due to hit, a cyclone so big it was predicted the winds that would reach us at Mossman would be Category 3. We were gearing up for a mass casualty event. That night I was sent to the evacuation centre to help the 260 people fearing for their homes and livelihoods. Fortunately, the winds were not nearly as severe as predicted. The next day I went straight from the evacuation centre to work. Feeling fatigued, I was lucky to only get a few cases, which gave me some time to rest. On Thursday night, I was on call and spent most of my time on jobs, only to be woken at 2 in the morning to attend to someone having difficulty breathing. At this point, I considered changing careers. Thankfully, by my final day of shifts, I was put on fatigue, and although I had to be in uniform ready for another hammering, I was not required to work. 3 days straight I had been working with minimum sleep. The only thing that kept me going in that time was the thought that many paramedics in far north Queensland were dealing with even tougher situations. I heard of some shocking stories from my paramedic friend who was working in Tully through this event. Amazingly, no one was killed in this catastrophic natural disaster. Yasi was the biggest cyclone ever seen in Australia's history to date. 3 weeks after the eye of the cyclone Yasi passed through the small town of Tully, I was sent to do relief work at the station. There is only one word to describe what I saw out there: devastation. Every second house had a roof or wall missing. The streets were strewn with damaged furniture, bits of tin and branches. The hills were brown because there were no leaves left on branches. Trees were ripped out of the ground, roots and all. I had not watched TV since the cyclone began, so these images before me were the first I witnessed of the destruction Cyclone Yasi had caused. With the hospital seriously damaged, work was hectic as well. The emergency department was the only section of the hospital in use. This meant nearly every patient that we brought in would then have to be transferred to Innisfail, 1 hour away. In the 3 days I worked in Tully, I had gathered up 5 hours of overtime. I was exhausted by the time I left, yet the permanent staff were still going hard. I heard some great stories in my time in Tully. I commend the paramedics who were working the day after the Category 5 cyclone swept through. With an interesting start to my paramedic career, it seemed there was never a dull moment in this job. Now in my 4th week, the times of chaos had eased, and so had my own inner chaos. Though it was a difficult time for me, mourning the loss of a relationship and learning a new world in the middle of a natural disaster, life was beginning to settle. I had new family in Mossman, a paramedic family who eased my loneliness. Just as I was settling into the role, I had a job that really shook me and challenged my perceptions of personal safety as a paramedic. It was a Saturday night and we were called to a party for an assault. A woman had been pushed and had sprained her ankle. A simple job, or so we thought. When I arrived on scene, there was an argument going on with a lot of yelling and swearing. I could not hear what my partner or patient was saying. The police allowed the fight to continue, knowing they would not be able to stop it. We were moving the patient to the ambulance to get out of this impossible situation, when for some reason the people in the fight followed us down to the ambulance. Punches were being thrown and I heard every swear word under the sun. The fight was intensifying, but we soon put a stop to that. As we were lifting the heavy patient up onto the stretcher, it tipped over due to soft ground. The patient fell off, causing the fighting crowd to turn on us. The group of men moved closer, now throwing threatening words of abuse at us. While I was kneeling in the wet gravel attempting to help the patient up, I looked up to see my partner surrounded by men. One of them hit him in the back, causing him to fall to his knees. My own safety was then threatened, with some of the men yelling at me as I helped the patient up off the ground. Thankfully, the situation was soon extinguished by the police and did not get too out of hand. Abuse on paramedics is a common thing up here in the north. It was a harsh reminder of the danger we can be faced with in this job. The following week I was faced with another challenging situation that would again push me to my limits. Although our job does not consist of life and death decisions every day, it is something that we need to be ready for at any moment. I was working overtime on my first ever shift with a student since graduating. Apparently I was required to not only have all the skills an advanced care paramedic needs, but was expected to teach and be in charge of a student as well. Crazy. It was midnight when we were called to a residence to attend to an unconscious 1-year-old with abnormal breathing. In my experience with these jobs, we would turn up with the baby looking all nice and pink and asleep, the mother fearing her worst nightmare. Unfortunately, that was not what I was faced with. Instead, when we arrived on scene, there was a lifeless child on the footpath, with the whole family surrounding it, unsure of what action to take. I got the baby onto the stretcher immediately, and thankfully I had some knowledge to draw on to make up for my lack of experience. I recognised the baby to be in a febrile seizure. I informed the hysterical mother and started my treatment. Oxygen, position, listen to breathing, take the breath rate, listen to the lungs, the oxygen levels, the pulse rate. Right, now life-threatening possibilities were cleared. Let's go for the thermometer and cool this baby down. Just as I was about to make the call to medicate the 1-year-old with midazolam, an intense care paramedic arrived at my side. This was lucky, as I was in no state to make a drug calculation for this child. As it turned out, I got help on this job, but for 5 minutes I was faced with a life-threatening situation, a hysterical family, and my career. One screw-up in this job, and you lose 3 years of study, get downgraded, and are then placed under scrutiny. So I guess what I learnt was to stay on top of my stuff and gather up all the experience I could, because you never know when you might be faced with a life or death situation with no one to help you out. The life of a paramedic: stress, long hours, responsibility, and a whole lot of caffeine and natural adrenaline. I should mention, on the way to hospital, the mother asked if her daughter was going to be okay. The answer she received was, "Everything is looking good considering." The truth in that moment, however, was unknown. Perhaps the child would have brain damage, having had high fever with a continuous seizure for more than 40 minutes. One of the hardest parts of the job. The intensity of the job was in no way numbing the pain I was feeling without my beloved. There was not a single night I did not miss him. I wrote many letters, most unsent, as I was attempting to hide my deep heartbreak. Work kept me distracted from this feeling of loss and loneliness. Each day I would gather my strength and play my role, committed to my work in the community. The work in Mossman was typical of a country station, all or nothing. We could go days without seeing a patient, then suddenly be faced with more patients than paramedics. The high tourist influx over Easter was now upon us, and we were expecting the workload to increase. On-call time came around, and from 10 p.m. that night, the real meaning of 24-hour shifts came to light. The night consisted of 4 call-outs, so I spent the following day on a fatigue break from 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., then sent on a single officer job with backup 20 minutes away. The job turned out to be more than a drunk person. It was a drunk person with a possible head injury who had aspirated on vomit and sputum from a possible lung infection. Of course, I was in an environment with several drunk people yelling at me, people fighting several metres away, and a few young guys trying to chat me up. "Sorry guys, but your friend here is kind of having trouble breathing." The patient was combative and not letting me treat him, so I did what I could and prayed for backup to arrive, which eventually did. An intense care paramedic turned up and sedated my patient, making him very easy to treat. Exhausted from the previous night, I went to bed early, only to be woken up to attend to a 3 a.m. assault, and it was only Thursday night. I was scheduled on a 10-hour fatigue break all day Friday, yet I was required to work. 4 jobs is not what I would call having a break, and the fatigue was building, both in my hours and in my body. Surely Mossman could not present us with any more work. But hey, it was Easter, so why stop the party there? The day was long, job after job, with 5 broken fatigues, and as the delirium began setting in, we got 3 more jobs, finishing at 3 in the morning, with a backload of paperwork to do. Hoping for a good sleep in, another job presented itself at 8 a.m. And so, lights and sirens blaring, we were off again. Thankfully, they brought in a crew from Cairns that day, so our work finished there. I was gifted a day off on Sunday, before I was to start it all again. The biggest break I had on those 6 days was probably 8 hours. That's if you can call it a break, when you are tied to your phone and the ambulance the entire time. I had tallied up 60 hours of fatigue time, so thankfully the adrenaline was pumping. My partner was humorous and the jobs were half decent. With a snake bite, jellyfish sting, dog bite, and a car versus horse incident. This was the craziest week in my paramedic career so far. After an intense week of work, I was faced with a whole new challenge, a whole new level of heartbreak. I received a letter from my boyfriend Eric, who had been feeling a similar loneliness and loss I had. The only difference was his loneliness was driving him back home, back to Denmark. I was filled with so much hurt that my chest pained of heartache. No way could I communicate my feelings to him from 2,000 kilometers away. My best friend, and one and only love, was simply going to walk out of my life. I went into a state of depression for 2 weeks. The heartache was so intense that I was crying uncontrollably whenever I was alone. Some days I would even cry at work if I was by myself. I had no control over this overwhelming emotion. I was usually such a hard nut to crack. It would take a lot to get me to breaking point. But this heartache took over my whole being. I was weak, wounded with no support. I spoke to no one about it during this 2-week mourning period, as I did not want to show my tears, and I could not speak of it without tears. It was the first time since my teenage years that I had fallen into such darkness. This was a different darkness, though, a darkness and pain that would heal with time. In this period I took to drinking to numb my pain. This became my medication for loneliness. My heart would heal, but the emptiness would remain. There is no room for personal baggage in the workplace of a paramedic. We must leave our challenges at home in order to be effective in our work, a job that commands commitment and respect. I got better at keeping my work life and personal troubles separate, and as my confidence and experience was building, so too was my enjoyment of the job. I was beginning to thrive in the high-stress, adrenaline-fueled environment. One experience that pushed my abilities and ability was a long job in the Daintree. We were dispatched at 8 p.m. to a job, but not just any job. We were heading Code 1, lights and sirens, to a patient having a severe allergic reaction to an antibiotic. This was the kind of job where you know the patient will be either very dead or very alive when you get there. We were an hour's ambulance drive away, with a ferry trip and a very windy road through the rainforest ahead of us. I was driving, eyes peeled to the road as I attempted to drive Code 1 in the middle of the rainforest. With no radio or phone signal, we arrived on scene. Thankfully, the patient was well perfused, with serious facial swelling and a partial obstruction to his airway, the obstruction being his swollen tongue. We gave him the 2 life-saving interventions, oxygen and adrenaline. With so much time wasted driving to scene, we tried to work quickly, get a line in, get the stretcher and get to hospital. Not only did we have all of that to think about, but we also had a chopper to think about. We had activated the emergency helicopter, with a doctor and paramedic en route to scene. But whether we needed them or not was our next decision. We decided to transport the patient ourselves, as he had responded to the adrenaline. But that meant another hour-long, winding return trip to hospital. I had never been so glad to see the hospital staff. Of course, it was 2 hours after our finishing time, but Our own adrenaline levels were running high. On completion of the Daintree job, our communications had already had another job waiting for us. We were almost grateful for the next job though, an opportunity to wind down. Joy began to come back into my life more and more, with a greater satisfaction in my work environment, some good friends to keep me company, and the heartache easing. It was a tough year, but I was beginning to find my joy and ease into this single life of freedom. To be a paramedic is an honour, and with honour comes challenges, horrors, long hours and average pay. With honour comes impossible situations, death and dying. With honour comes tragic sights and sad stories. Today I worked 13 hours without a meal break. In the 13th hour, I had my first chance to rest my brain and muscles. We had 11 patients in the shift and a multi-casualty job that my partner and myself managed alone, as there were no other crews available. It involved 2 children and a distressed mother in a car accident. What made the day even more challenging was all the patients in between. 7 patients that didn't really need an ambulance. The patients we risk our lives for responding to Code 1 because they have given incorrect information to 000 call receivers. How is it that we can risk our lives on the road to get to someone that has had the flu for a few weeks? My point is clear. To be a paramedic, you must be different, slightly insane, or just up for adrenaline-pumping action 24 hours a day. To be a paramedic, you must bite your tongue. We are always in the public eye. They see the uniform, but they do not see much more. They don't see that we have been without a meal break all day. They do not see that a few moments ago we told a mother that she just lost her child, or a 3-year-old that he just lost his mother. To be a paramedic, you've got to be superhuman. To be human is to show emotion and to make mistakes. But in our world, mistakes can cost lives, and emotions can turn a bad situation worse. The public see us as a superhuman. For when we walk in the door, they think we have come to save them. No matter what we walk into, we must show them that we are capable. To be a paramedic is to be an honourable superhuman. It is nearly 2 months on from my last holy shit moment. 2 months ago, I started at Edmonton Station with a busy adrenaline-pumping welcome. In my first week, I was second officer for an unconscious 39-year-old man. It was immediately obvious that he was close to death. Such a surreal feeling. 3 of us buzzed around him, clearing the airway, clearing it again and again and again. Passive regurgitation made it getting an airway near impossible. Ventilation was the most important thing this guy needed. An unreadable blood pressure made us realize that this was probably a stroke or a bleed in the brain. One blown pupil confirmed this. Right, now I'm going to get an intravenous access. The veins are okay. Need someone to hold up a torch for me to see properly. I go in with confidence. Shit, I say, blew it. Then the intensive care paramedic enters the room. Good, we can get a better airway with this guy. With 2 experienced advanced care paramedics and 1 intensive care paramedic hovering over me, I need to get this line in. I go in again, with all my focus on getting it. All right, I'm in. Right, now we get the fluids up and running. Suddenly a spine board arrives and a stretcher. I find myself at the head end ventilating the patient as he is moved. Then into the ambulance and I'm in the driver's seat. Okay, this is going to be a Code 1 drive to hospital, but steady round the corners. Right, sure thing. I yell. I verbalise every corner and roundabout to the crew, as it is a long, rough trip for them to hospital. Halfway there and someone in the back yells, "Pull over!" I look back to see they have started CPR. The young man has gone into arrest. I immediately jump in the back, draw up a few lots of adrenaline. The intensive care paramedic gets the endotracheal tube in for a better airway. But it is difficult with passive regurgitation. The paramedic following behind jumps in the driver's seat and we continue on to hospital code 1. 10 minutes later, we get output. Great, okay, you can stop CPR now. The intense care paramedic puts in a gastro tube through the ET tube to get some gas out of the stomach, as to not impede too much on his lung capacity. We arrive at hospital working on this guy for more than an hour. 4 paramedics jump out and he gets rushed to resus. 2 minutes later, we see them commencing CPR again. This is not a good sign. He will probably be dead in less than an hour. After finishing the job, we are exhausted, but all of Cairns is getting smashed with jobs tonight, so we must clear up and be respondable as soon as possible. Some of the crews come to assist with the clean-up. It was a messy job and there is equipment spread everywhere. Still unrespondable, I drop 2 paramedics off at their vehicle and go to Cairns Station to restock and clean up the airway stuff. Of course, many things went wrong on the job, a big one being that our ECG leads weren't working. I race into Cairns Station looking everywhere, but I cannot find any. Into communications, go to get the key to the office. I'm hurried to get to a car accident. Okay, I say, just give me another 5. There is a lot to clean up. 3 times communications call me on the radio. Are you respondable? Are you respondable? No, I say, I'm putting together the bag valve mask. No, I'm checking the equipment. No, I'm restocking. Finally, I'm ready and I race off to the next job. We received no debrief about our sick patient that night. Nothing but constant jobs all night. A little down and feeling hopeless, I drive home at 1 a.m. in the morning. Another 12-hour shift with overtime and little break. I hope for a better day tomorrow. The next day it is not a better day, it is worse. Although not as busy, it is emotionally draining. While at hospital we are requested to have a quick turnaround to back up another crew. This must be a big job, so we rush to get the stretcher made up and proceed. We get on scene to find the crew hovering over a 5-year-old boy who is heavily sedated but still seizing after almost 30 minutes. We bring in the stretcher ready for a quick extrication. There is nothing more the intensive care paramedic can do. This kid needs a hospital immediately. One image that will stick in my mind forever will be seeing the father with tears in his eyes pick up his limp little boy and place him on the stretcher. I jump in the driver's seat yet again and drive code 1 to hospital. There is no change in the kid's condition, and we are all fearing the worst. Still to this day, I do not know what the outcome was. I don't think I want to. We really do need to be ready for anything. Some days you lose them, some days you save them, but thankfully most days the patients aren't very sick at all. I've stopped being a job chaser, for I no longer wish to bear the life of another in my hands. One thing I know, every paramedic in the world dreads, is the death of a young, innocent child. Whether it is a child that drowns in a nearby creek or a teenage boy that chose to drink drive, we see it all in this job. After an intense week, I begin to reflect on my struggles as a student and the many people who doubted my paramedic abilities. 2 years ago I was tested, scrutinised and questioned if I was suitable for the job. Many doubted my abilities and questioned whether I would graduate, or whether I could hack it in the job. Since then I have travelled 2,000 kilometres for my first placement as a qualified, lived through a cyclone and moved house 3 times. I have worked as a single officer within a month of my first posting, worked in cities, worked in the country and worked at single officer stations. All up I have relieved at 5 different stations from Tully to Port Douglas. I have not yet let anyone down. patients or colleagues. 2 years on, I have mentored and experienced life and death in my hands. 2 years on, still eager to learn and grow, with only a touch of cynicism. But I have not lost my ability to care, and I have not lost my love for the job. All you have to do is put those who do not believe you behind you, and those that do beside you. At the end of the day, the only one that can walk the steps is you. You can fall or trip, but if you continue to get up, you will forever be moving forward. No mountain is too high if you just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Many times I have been pushed to my limits in this job, but there was one day that really drained my desire to keep going. It was the longest shift of my paramedic career. Today should have made the news. Today I worked nearly 14 hours with not even a minute's break. As we were getting our last job, I turned to my partner and said, "Is this allowed?" I did not think it would be legal to work a paramedic 13 and a half hours straight, but today I found out that it was. I feel lucky that I got home safely from my 45-minute drive home, because I was actually a danger on the road. I just hope for a better day tomorrow. After 2 years of living away from family and friends, I was beginning to hear the call back home. I made the decision to leave my tropical paradise to be closer to family and offer my assistance on the family farm. I had one more harvest left in me and managed to coincide my transfer in time for the wheat harvest. I was sad to be leaving this place. It had become my home, but I knew that it was time to go back to my roots. I could not bear another Christmas away from family, as Christmas is the only time of the year that my whole family can get together. I packed up my little car to the roof and waved goodbye to my far north Queensland family. The closest station I could transfer to was 4 hours from my family farm, but after the distances I had travelled, this did not seem far at all. While I did miss Christmas Day with my family, I was able to change my shifts to get the following 3 days off. Then it was back to work, ready to work the busiest time of the year, New Year's. This was a busy night with continuous jobs, and the work did not finish when the sun came up. Just another 36-hour shift in this crazy paramedic world. I was wrong to assume that Cyclone Yasi would be the only natural disaster I'd come across. It seems that I'm not fully welcome to a place until there is a natural disaster. Kingaroy gave me another kind of initiation, the floods of 2013. While they were not as severe as those that ripped through the South Burnett in 2011, they were enough to put people in danger. At 5 p.m. we were called to someone stuck in floodwaters, clinging to a tree. They were 45 minutes and 3 creek crossings away. We get to the first creek crossing and know that we cannot make it in our Mercedes Sprinter, but thankfully a 4-wheel drive ambulance is on the way. 20 minutes later the boss arrives in the 4-wheel drive and we make it across the creeks. On arrival we discovered the man had been rescued by family. It was a typical flood story. A man aged in his 50s jumps into floodwater to save another. Meanwhile, this person is pulled to safety, but the rescuer is unable to save himself. He clings to a tree while his son watches in despair. They realise that the swift water rescue team will take at least 1 hour to reach them, so the son makes the potentially fatal decision to rescue his father. Had either of these 3 people been swept away, they would not have survived to tell the story. They were lucky to survive, and thankfully we only had to treat the father for hypothermia. Of course, the story did not end there. We assisted the man from his house out to our four-wheel-drive ambulance, but the creeks were still rising. We were in a frantic hurry as all 3 creek crossings had risen. But we were lucky enough to get across safely with 3 paramedics and 1 patient on board. So this was my official welcome to Kingaroy. Kingaroy continued to provide me with new challenges. I had my first helicopter job with a life-threatening car accident. I arrived on scene with my 3rd-year university student. My partner goes to the mother and son in the other vehicle as I race to the sick one. The scene is under my control and I am patient care for now, responsible for the life of a 62-year-old female who is severely injured in front of me. The car has such severe frontal impact that the bonnet no longer exists, nor does the front windscreen. The dash is pushed into the lady's legs, and the surreal thing is, the lady, GCS 14, altered conscious state, is so stunned with severe amnesia that she cannot take in the extent of the accident. For the whole hour she is repeating her words. My legs hurt. I've never been in a car accident before. I just want to stretch my legs. Fireys buzz round me, police close half the road, and my partner treats the other 2 patients in the accident. My frazzled student can't focus on tasks and almost trembles in her boots, so I keep directing her to tasks. Minutes later the boss arrives and it's all on. Now I have orders being directed at me, a student unsure of what to do, fireys cutting around the car, around me, and distressed patients. I keep the scene as calm as possible. Some take this as not handling the situation, but I know what I'm doing, and I keep working as methodically as possible. I order the fireys. I need her cut out as quickly as possible. I need that other door open. I need that back seat pushed out of the way. First assessment of the patient is complete. Everyone is completing their roles. My partner's back, and we have our first line in. The good thing about the boss being on scene is he is now the liaison person, updating communications and activating the chopper. I get access to the passenger seat and sit next to the patient for over an hour as fireys cut her out. First the A-pillars, then the roof comes off, then finally the dash comes off her legs and we see the extent of her injuries for the first time. All in all, it looks like there is over 5 fractures, bilateral left wrist fractures, sternum fracture, likely to be rib fractures and right foot fractures. The fluids are running to get her falling blood pressure up as the fireys cut. Then bugger, the line comes out. My partner hands me some more cannulation gear and says I have to try the other arm. This is the fractured arm, now splintered. I think to myself, this is near impossible at this angle. With all the excessive adipose tissue, I can't even feel a vein. I try. I win. A smile comes across my face for a short moment, and then it is straight back to work. I fix another bag of fluids. Her blood pressure is still falling. She is sure to have internal injuries with all of these signs, but with my continuous talking to her, she is not deteriorating neurologically. We fix up the other line. Nearly 1 litre of fluid has gone in. Her blood pressure is going up, and now her legs are freed. We bandage the large laceration to her knee, and then a moment I will never forget. I hear the chopper overhead, and feel like both our lives have been saved. I had not even been notified that the chopper was coming, but I am relieved. I give the handover to the doctor and intensive care paramedic just as she is ready to be extricated. They seem happy as they have no orders to give, and they look calm. After 80 minutes, the 62-year-old female who had just been travelling home is freed from her barely recognisable tiny car. Once again, we get to work. She is put straight onto the extrication vacuum mat and chopper stretcher. On goes the pelvic splint and vacuum splint for her leg, and it is here that we find out she may have a right hip fracture. This means potential for significant blood loss. The whole road gets closed off, and as we wheel the patient 100 metres down the highway to the chopper, they land in a grass paddock on the side of the road. By now our patient is actually looking to be in a better condition. We see the helicopter take off to the Royal Brisbane Hospital, and I feel that she will survive with only fractures. That is when I think, lucky or unlucky? I pat my student on the back as I look into her dear eyes, full of excitement. This was the biggest job she has ever been to. Today I feel I am doing my job. Finally, I have that feeling. Some days I really love my job. I thrive on the adrenaline and life is exciting. Other days I am just surviving in the sea of egos amongst the sick. Such a tough decision to stay with the job or move on to bigger dreams. My life is in transition, from a paramedic to a spiritual healer, from protocols and egos to initiation, intuition, and open hearts. I am grateful for all that the paramedic world has taught me about life and dying. No one understands death and dying more than a paramedic. From death in our care to the long deceased, from murders to natural deaths, the biggest privilege of all, though, is seeing life come into the world. Some days we are the last person a soul will see before they leave this earth, but some days we are the first. A paramedic also sees many walks of life and how they live. From the homeless to the wealthy, we see their homes, their lives. We see the depressed, the suicidal, and those that are lucky to be alive. We see how life can change in an instant, where a healthy young person with the world at their feet can have all that taken away from them in one car accident. Nothing is more tragic, however, than the loss of a young life. Some days are hard because of what we see, but most days are hard because of how we work. 12-hour night shifts can stretch into 14-hour night shifts. Days can be so busy that we miss our meal breaks. 12 hours without a break is not unheard of in the city. Rural folk can do it rough as well, required to be on call between day shifts. Sometimes they can seem to work 24 hours around the clock. While the job might be tough, a paramedic takes it in their stride. They thrive on adrenaline, they survive on mateship, and they hold each other strong. I'm grateful to have lived the paramedic experience. I'm grateful not just for the friends I have made, but also for the strong egos and bullies that have made me stronger, tougher, and wiser. I am grateful that I have been pushed physically, mentally, and emotionally to my limits, sometimes all in a day. I am grateful for the harsh lessons, the survival instincts, and the protocol pressure. While it has taken its toll on my body, I have become strong and resilient, and above all, I have come to understand the everyday world. It is these gifts that I will carry with me as I dive into my long-awaited spiritual journey.